Boker Tov and good morning, everyone. As we are starting our Torah study this morning, just a few minutes behind schedule because today is Rosh Chodesh. Today is the head of the month, top of the month. It's a new month. It is the month of Tammuz, a new light, a new energy, a new day that has never seen the light of day of this world. What are you going to do with this day? Hashem is waiting to see your choices, how you will utilize this day, this month, this new light and this new energy. Today we're learning the Kosher Crash Course because today is Thursday, and it is Thursday, June 10th, Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Good morning, Keith Kleinick and Winston from Indonesia. Welcome to our Torah study here. And Rob Berger, good morning. I know I owe you a call, Rob, and I will. Winston also with us on Facebook. We're learning today the laws of the Mikvah with relating to our dishes. Now we know about for women, and we know about mikvah for men, and we give you a quick intro background to that. The Torah tells us that a woman has to go to mikvah when it coincides with a menstrual cycle, not because, don't believe the myth, the misconception. It's not because she's ugly or dirty or schmutzik, none of that. She goes to the mikvah because of a spiritual contamination. What is that spiritual contamination? It's death. Death. Just like when you go into a cemetery or you touch a dead body, you become spiritually impure. Anybody does. So too when a woman menstruates, what is that being menstruated? What is coming out? It is the potential for human life, which not conceive. That is the potential of human life that, washed out, that became passed out. That is the contact with death, which is why the woman, a married woman, and now has to go to mikvah in order to be back again with her husband after 12 days. Approximately. A man also has to go to mikvah. Very interesting. Not many people know this. Ezra, the scribe, who was the leader of the Jewish people when we came out of Persia after the Purim story to rebuild the second temple, he instituted something called Tvilas Ezra, the dipping of Ezra in the mikvah, which is for men to do before they study Torah if they've experienced a seminal emission. Interesting. So this takana, this how do you say that in English? This law, not sakana, takana. This law, let's call it, of Ezra, didn't actually take hold, take root. It was a little too difficult for everybody to actually employ. However, Hasidic Jews will employ this and do employ this. They go to mikveh every single morning. Men go to mikveh every single morning. They don't just think about what might have happened last night. Well, they'll go either in the local mikveh. They'll have a mikveh, and we need to build a mikveh in Palm Beach Gardens, God willing, very soon. Or we'll go in a swimming pool, because a man doesn't need a mikveh as kosher as a woman does. You're going to a river, you're going to an ocean. Yeah, you can go to different places. In fact, in our mikveh in my neighborhood, there's, I live in the Woodland Lakes. There's a lake in front that says, there's a sign up front that says, "Do not use for mikveh, alligators present." True. It says don't use for swimming, but they mean mikveh. Good morning to my cousin Shmaya Futterfass, who's with us on YouTube, on your Facebook, and to Elaine, who's with us on YouTube as well. Welcome to everybody. Good. So now we learned about men and women in the mikveh. What about dishes in the mikveh? So what do you know about dishes in the mikveh? Marty's making a face, which means he has no idea what I'm talking about. This is good, because we are about to learn a whole new section of Jewish law, which begins in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, chapter 31, verse 23. It's coming up in a few weeks' time in the Torah, near the end of the book of Numbers of Bamidbar in the desert. And it talks about, it's concerning the war that Moses leads the Jewish people against the nation of Midian. And after the Jewish people conquered Midian and they collected the booty, the bounty of war, they now had a lot of non-kosher vessels that needed to be koshered. In order to kosher these vessels, there's two components to koshering of the vessels, which Moses teaches us. First of all, you need to purify them spiritually. Second of all, you need to purify. You need to kosher them from the non-kosher food. So the laws of koshering vessels from non-kosher food to kosher food, we learn from that story and those verses in the Torah, that you kosher the vessels either through fire or through boiling water. That's a different section of Jewish law. We're not doing that one today. What we are talking about today is the spiritualizing, the purification, not the koshering of the non-kosher to kosher flavor, but the spiritual purification of the vessel from non-kosher ownership to kosher ownership, to Jewish ownership, right? And the verse goes like this. It says, it has to be purified in the waters of Mikvah. And from here, our sages learned the mitzvah of dipping our dishes in a Mikvah. Pretty much most commentaries agree that this is actually a biblical mitzvah, which it means it's as important as Shabbos, as tefillin, as kosher. It is a biblical obligation to dip your vessels in a mikvah if you've, under certain circumstances. We're going to go through that right now. What kind of vessels? Under which circumstances? What are the exemptions and exclusions, right? A biblical commandment, one of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah.
It's interesting to note that signs of first Jewish communities anywhere had mikvahs.
Right.
Caribbean islands.
In archaeological diggings, they often will identify a Jewish community when they find this underground spa. When they find the underground spa, they'll find, they even see the water level of the water. Sometimes they'll find the water still there. In Rostov in southern Russia, 100 years after the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, left, my colleague lives there right now. They found the mikveh underneath, some kitchen situation over there, but they found the water was still in the mikveh. But you'll see, like in archaeological diggings, you'll see that ancient places that there's these steps that go, and you can tell that it's some sort of a pool of water, and there's even a water level that you can see, like a residue of whatever schmutz was there. And but it's interesting. That's a regular mikveh, a kelim mikveh, a dishes mikveh. You often find, like in frum communities and observant Jewish communities, you'll find that the appliance store will often have a mikveh inside the store. Because, like in Borough Park, in Crown Heights, in Jerusalem, you'll buy a set of dishes, but you can't use them before you dip them in the mikveh. So in the store, they'll dip it right there for you. They'll say, here you go. Purchase and dip, right? Swipe and dip. Swipe the card, dip, you good, go.
They dry your dishes?
They probably dry them too. Yeah, it's not my forte. I don't normally do the shopping. We specialize in Amazon. We're trying to get Amazon to do a mikveh service.
Yeah, right.
But
You need Amazon Prime.
Amazon very prime. Right, good. So the purpose of this dipping in the mikveh is not for kosher purposes, but for spiritual purposes. Just like the woman going to the mikveh, which is not for cleanliness because she's dirty, but for spiritual cleansing, right? Now, this...
What happens if the woman is certainly beyond childbearing age?
A woman that is post-menopause
Yes.
is it doesn't go to mikveh because she doesn't have the menstrual cycle.
Right.
So then she doesn't do it. Right. I see that Joe G says that's awesome. I'd love I'd tell all my stuff that way. Fantastic. Good. I think she would agree with the Amazon concept. We're working on it. Good. Okay. Let me know if anybody has a cell phone to Jeff Bezos. Let me know. All right. Good. So from this command, we learn that the obligation to dip our dishes in a mikveh applies under the following conditions. Number one, the dishes go from the possession of a non-Jew to a Jew. Which means if it's not in the possession of a Jew, then you don't need to dip the vessel in a mikveh. For example, 1 year ago, do you remember what the world looked like 1 year ago?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you'd rather not. It was awful. People were totally confused and totally, terrified by the talking head media. And what happened was that people were afraid to venture out of their homes. So normally before Pesach, people will buy new dishes and dip them in the mikveh. So there was a special dispensation going around that would allow you to be exempt from dipping your dishes in the mikveh. In the same way that you sell your chametz to a Gentile, you would sell your dishes to a Gentile, and thus they were now in the possession of a Gentile, and you were just borrowing them. in which case they were exempt from the mikvah. So you don't have to go to the mikvah and, God forbid, contaminate yourself from the terrible pandemic. Right? Interesting, right? So, well, if you don't want to go through the hassle of selling your dishes to a Gentile, you can just dip them in a mikvah, right? Number two, the second condition is that it's got to be dishes that pertain to food and eating. Right? It's not just any dishes. It's food, it's dishes that come in contact with the food. Also, it applies only to the following kind of dishes: metal, only metal, and glass, which is similar to metal. Yeah, we'll get to the various details of melamine in a few moments. Okay, so the only difference is that the only one that's biblically obligated is metal. But the ones that are glass is not biblically obligated, it's only rabbinically obligated. Okay, so the biblical obligation is only for metal. That's it. Only metal dishes. Now, things get complicated when you buy a fork, which is half plastic and it's got metal in it, right? You know what I mean? You know, you get a fork, it's like the handle is made out of melamine, made out of I don't know what, right? And the fork itself is made out of metal. That's when things get a little complicated. So next time you buy a microwave or a toaster, you're going to dip it in the mikvah first.
Blow it up.
Don't turn it on before you put it in the mikvah. No. So why do I mention that? Why do I mention that part? Is because you obviously, if you're going to break the dish by putting it in the mikvah, then you wouldn't be able to do it. So if you buy yourself, like a little toaster oven, and you put it in the mikvah, I don't think it's going to work afterwards.
Yeah.
Right. So, right. And if it does, just make sure that you're very, very far away from the outlet when you plug it in. Another thing is, interesting. We had a Zoom event with the Chabad of Northern Australia, Northern Queensland, a few days ago, and they were saying how they live out there in the middle of nowhere where there's very few Jews, and when they go to the beach, everyone's out there at the beach sunning themselves in the Great Barrier Reef, and these guys show up to the beach with their pots and pans, with their butcher knives. They come there. And everybody's a little confused. They're like, "Oh my God, the terrorists have arrived. I don't know what's going on." They're bringing knives to the beach. I'm just plugging my computer in. Bear with me, please. Oh, you got. So it's very clear. Hopefully, it's only metal that is obligated in the biblical commandment of dipping your vessels in the mikveh before you use them. Only if it goes from the possession of a Gentile to a Jew, and only vessels that come in contact with food. What happens? Let's talk about the ownership of the Gentile, right? So, it's only when you buy it or receive it as a gift from a Gentile. It doesn't make a difference if it's an old vessel which has been used, in which case you'd also have to kosher it.
Right.
Or if it is a brand new vessel. Right? A vessel that was owned by a Jew, then it was sold to a Gentile, and then it was sold to another Jew. That one also needs to have be dipped in the mikvah with a blessing. We say a blessing on this. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu v'setzivanu al tvilas kelim. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has commanded us, who has married us through the mitzvah, through the intimacy of dipping vessels. It's a biblical mitzvah to do this. All right? There's a mikvah, by the way, in West Palm Beach, in a place called Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim is an Orthodox shul in Century Village, just outside of Century Village. They have a little mikvah over there, and there's a kelim mikvah there too. Or you can do what we do. I just go to Phil Foster Park, I think it's called, which is Blue Heron, underneath the Blue Heron Bridge. If you go over the Blue Heron Bridge, you know the Blue Heron Bridge?
Yeah.
Head east on Blue Heron. You know what that is, right?
Yeah.
It's an exit on 995. 2 exits south of PGA Boulevard.
Yeah.
So if you head east on Blue Heron, and you go over the bridge to get onto Singer Island, just before you get into Singer Island, there's this little exit, and it takes you to this little park where they like to snorkel, and it's right next to Peanut Island. And I like it because it's a place where basically you get these boats. You can drive your car basically straight. It's a boat ramp, right? Anywhere there's a boat ramp, it's great. You just you back up your car like as if you were a boat, and instead of having a boat there or a canoe, you just have your kitchen and everything else. And then we just dip our vessels. It's nice because it has these little concrete things over there. So that's what I use. What?
Jupiter, they're having a mikvah in the new shul.
Yeah, I know about that. Good. Okay, fine. So very good. Now, let's see what happens. So Furthermore, even a dish that was made by a Gentile for the Jew from material that was owned by the Jew. Let's say you owned I don't know, you owned some metal. I don't know what raw metal looks like, but you owned some metal. You gave it to a Gentile craftsman to make it for you, right? You still have to dip that in the mikvah. But in this case, since it wasn't actually owned by the Gentile, it was only made by the Gentile. Here you dip it without a blessing, right? Turns out that a factory where the employees are Gentiles, even if the owners are Jews, right? In this case, you do dip those vessels that you buy from that factory. If that Jewish-owned factory, employees are Gentiles, you dip that in the mikvah without a blessing, right? Is any a Jewish-owned company that makes dishes? I guess if you buy from an Israeli company, right? What do they call themselves? Mashbir Latzarkan. Some Israeli company, right? If they have Arab workers over there, you still need to dip it in the mikvah.
You're saying if it's a company that makes it, that could be Jewish? I mean, these days, stock ownership, for sure, Jews own stock.
Yeah, but the stock ownership of a Jew in the company is so small. The stock ownership of an individual Jew in a company would be so small that it wouldn't count to make it a Jewish-owned company. You don't have ownership shares, right? In the same way that when it comes to chametz on Pesach, that you can't say that if you own stock in Walmart or in
When you talk about huge companies, then
if you own a stock, it doesn't mean that if Walmart didn't sell their chametz, therefore it's all forever prohibited ever again. You don't do that because it's too small a share. All right, let's go a little further here, guys. All right. What about a vessel that was purchased into a partnership of a Jew and a Gentile? So you bought it together. Let's say you own a company that is 50% owned by you, 50% owned by a Gentile, right? And now that vessel is purchased by your company. So what does that need to be dipped in a mikvah? Sorry, if it's purchased from a co-owned company, from a Jew and Gentile-owned company, right? Similarly, a factory its owners are have shares. They have an IPO. They have publicly traded, and they have shares in such a way that part of the stocks are owned by Jews and part are owned by Gentiles. So what we actually do in that case is that we dip the vessels in a mikvah, but when we have a question, we don't make a blessing. Right? Let me just check here a second. Okay, so basically, whenever you're in doubt when it comes to dipping the vessels in the mikvah, you dip them, you just do it without a blessing. So if you have doubt, and you say maybe it was owned by a Jew, at the very least, you do the mitzvah, you just didn't say the name of God in vain, right? Okay, now, what kind of vessels will need to be dipped in a mikvah? So we generally said it's got to be a vessel that's used for a meal that comes in contact with food, and also we said it's a vessel that is made of metal. So what does this mean? Let's clarify. Any vessels that come in contact with food or with drink at the time of the meal or the preparation for the meal, including vessels that are used for grinding, cutting, cooking, baking. The exception would be vessels that come in contact with the food in the early stages of the food, before the food is even able to be eaten. For example, a sieve to sift the flour. You can't eat flour. So that comes in contact with the food in a very early stage. Vessels that are used for kneading dough. You don't eat the dough. It's not in an edible state, right? Like the rollers, right? A knife, not a regular knife, but a knife that's used to slaughter, a shchita knife, right? The slaughtering knife. All of these, you dip them without a blessing. Again, if you have any doubt, you dip it in the mikveh if it's made of metal, but it's done without a blessing. But a dish, a vessel that doesn't come in contact with the actual food. Included in this is a vessel that's used as a basis for a different vessel. They don't need any mikveh at all. So the toaster would actually need dipping in the mikveh, if not for the practical problem that it's not going to work anyway, right? But your oven's not going to work either if you dip it in the mikveh, right?
It does work.
Right. Yeah, you dip it in the mikveh, you can buy another oven, right?
Then you have to do it again.
Right. But What's a vessel that doesn't come in contact with the food? Kind of like a placemat, probably. Right? If you have a metal placemat, let's say, for whatever reason, you can have a metal placemat.
What about your China?
China. Well, China's not made out of metal, right?
Right. So you don't have to kosher.
But is China kind of metal? A kind of a glass, I mean. It's some sort of a porcelain, really. Porcelain. We'll get to porcelain in a moment, right? So vessels that are used only for storage, right? They also need to be dipped without a blessing. So now think about this for a moment. You have like a bread bin made of metal. It's made of metal. It comes in contact with the bread. Yeah, I haven't seen them in ages, right? Why don't we use them? Why? Why don't we use them anymore?
To hide the bread because it sit on the counter. Keep insects out of it. I don't think so. It wasn't.
But if sometimes you use those vessels to actually serve at the table, then you do dip them with the blessing. So basically, anything which sometimes even comes in contact with the food itself at the table or in a state of readiness needs to be dipped with the blessing. But if it's secondary status, there's 3 levels. One which never comes in contact with the food. It's only like a basis, or it's comes in contact with the food when it's no. If it comes in contact with food when it's not edible, then you dip it without a blessing. If it's metal or glass, if it comes in contact with the food, if it doesn't actually come in contact with the food, it just serves at a basis or at some sort of a distance, then it doesn't need mikvah at all. But if sometimes it's used for food, maybe like tongs, I guess. I guess tongs are used always for the same thing, right? Right? If there's sometimes, you can think about this yourself. If there's something that you use for food sometimes, then you would need to dip it in the mikvah, right? Good. Joji, sorry, if I receive a gift of pots from a Jewish family, do I toivel it? The answer is no, because it came from a Jewish family. The question is, where did they get it from? And did they toivel it in the mikvah? So if they received it from a non-Jewish family, or if they received it from a non-Jewish company and they never dipped it in the mikvah, then you should dip it now in the mikvah.
And in metal, you're including fully enamel metal.
Now, what does enamel mean? Enamel is what?
Enamel, like a paint. But it's fired on. It's baked onto it over the metal. It's like a ceramic liquor salt, stout.
What exactly is enamel? Is it porcelain? Look it up. Tell me what it is. All right. Okay. Fine. So let's talk about this last piece over here. So the kind of vessels that need to be dipped in the mikvah. According to the law, the obligation to dip in a mikvah, biblically, we just said, is only for metal. Only metal needs to be dipped in the mikvah. But included in that metal is the following: gold dishes.
Gold dishes.
Tell that to Mr. Trump. Right? You need gold dishes.
Gold toilets.
No, gold toilets don't come in contact with the food. All right. So gold, silver, copper, metal, tin. Well, metal. When I say metal, I mean like iron or steel, right? Tin. Aluminum. That's right. Any kind of metal. Any kind of metal, right? Whatever. If it looks like a metal, if it smells like a metal, then it needs to be dipped in the mikvah. And there's all sorts of interesting composites today that they make vessels out of, which makes it complicated. And the same thing would apply to anything which is related to the glass family, including Duralex, Pyrex, Corel. How did they say Corel? I think it's called Corel dishes, right? All sorts of interesting names. If it comes from the glass family, then it needs to be dipped in a mikvah. Glass family or metal family. Now, dishes that are made out of clay, porcelain, ceramics, which all of these are not glass family. And what is China? Can you tell me what China is? Is China porcelain family?
It's more like the previous one, like clay.
I think it's clay, yeah. Isn't it bone China? It's made out of bones. What's bone China mean? What does bone China actually mean? It's not made out of bone.
Check it out. I'm still working on enamel.
Yeah, it's working on enamel. You need to be like a scientist to be able to know these kind of vessels, right? It's only the Jews that walk into the store and they want to know. I want to tell you, when I was doing my kitchen, Marty, and I know you liked my countertop. I remember we first chose a material that was beautiful but wasn't able to be koshered. wasn't able to be kosher. It wasn't a stone. It was more of a porcelain family. I'm not sure if it was a quartz. What do I have? Quartz or quartzite?
Quartzite, which is
I've-
natural.
Which is natural. So quartzite is a stone, right? So the quartzite is natural, but the quartz is not necessarily kosherable, which is why we had to walk away from that.
Because that's pretend.
It's pretend. So it's more of it's got more of a plastic in it or something like that, right? Okay, fine. So Joji's telling me that bone china is bone and clay. Joji says it's bone and clay.
No.
That's what she says.
It says it's a type of porcelain that's a compost of bone ash.
So she's right, bone ash.
Well, but it's a porcelain.
But it's made out of bone and porcelain.
Bone ash.
Very good. So let's take a look at that. So any vessels that are made out of porcelain, clay.
Kaolin, you know, like kaolin.
I don't know what that is.
Kaolin is the soil. Kaolin is in the soil, but that's usually.
Fine. No, is made out of bones and it's made out of porcelain. So anything which is made out of porcelain or ceramics or clay, which is obviously not including a glass in it, or if it's made out of stone or wood or nylon or paper or plastic, according to the law, they do not need to be dipped in the mikveh at all. However, today we are stringent with this, and we do dip them in the mikveh without a blessing.
Bone china is the strongest of porcelain.
Do you understand what I'm saying? So even though it doesn't need to be dipped in the mikveh, we still do dip it in the mikveh. Why? Just to be safe, because you never really know what kind of composites are inside of those modern day mixtures, and therefore we're strict to dip them in the mikveh anyways.
Okay, I figured out the enamel. It's vitreous enamel, also called porcelain enamel, made by fusing powdered glass at a substrate by firing, usually between 750 and 850 degrees Celsius.
So enamel sounds like it's a composite of glass and porcelain.
Yeah.
It sounds like glass and porcelain. Now, glass would need a mikveh. Porcelain would not, which would explain why something which has enamel would probably need to be put in a mikveh without a blessing. Now, the question is, when you get all sorts of these composites, you got a metal something with an enamel, ceramic, glazed, God knows what substance on it, right? And you're not quite sure exactly what it is. Only the Jews walk into the store and they're like, so what exactly is this made out of? And who owned this before you did, right? We get very technical, right? Okay, something which is mixed, which is made up of a mixture of metal and some other substance that is not obligated to be dipped in the mikveh. It all depends. If the metal is the interior part of the vessel, then it certainly needs to be dipped in the mikveh with a blessing. And if the metal is on the outside part of the vessel, then it does not need to be dipped with a blessing. What about disposable dishes? What about disposable dishes? We said plastics. We said we do dip in the mikveh, right? Without a blessing. So if you have disposable forks and knives, you have to dip them in the mikveh. That would kind of defeat the purpose of the disposable thing, right? So even if the disposable is made out of metal, and I guess there is such a thing as disposable metal dishes, they do not need to be dipped in the mikveh. Why? The commentaries explain. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein explains that even if they're sometimes used 2 or 3 times, sometimes people will wash their disposable dishes. They'll use them a couple times. It's possible that even then they wouldn't need to be dipped in the mikveh. There are those that are careful that if you're going to use them under extended more than once, they would be careful to dip them in the mikveh without a blessing. So that is the first part. We'll carry on next week with the remainder of the laws of the mikveh for the dishes, as well as we're going to go into specific details of how you're supposed to dip things in the mikveh, like the toaster. You'll see. It is supposed to be dipped in the mikveh. We can try to work out how to do that. All right, fine. So with that, folks, today is Thursday. Corey gives a class on Hebrew language through the Siddur today, and that's on Zoom at 11:30 for men and women, jewishgardens.com/Zoom. Meanwhile, I'd like to wish everybody a wonderful day. Winston, may I know when your teaching material is from? It's okay if it's only in Hebrew. I'm using a book, Winston, which is a Hebrew book that is a... Laws of Kosher. It's a compilation of various laws of kosher. Let me know if you want further information on that. Anyways, thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Shalom.
Thank you. So have a good summer.